Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofrumento, and I'll tell you what, as we race to the end of an epic year here in 2024, the conversation on so many people's minds is AI. Everyone wants to talk about AI, but we often forget about the underlying ingredient to AI, which is data. And so that's why we've gone out. We found an incredible guest here today that we're all in for a real treat to learn from him, because this is someone who understands data in a really human, understandable way. This is someone who brings these complex topics and brings it to the human level so that we can actually understand it, make sense of it, and use it to all of our advantages in our businesses, because data touches so many different aspects, including, as I kind of tease, a little bit about AI. So let me tell you about today's guest. His name is Bradley Boldenow. Bradley is a seasoned data consultant with 7 years of experience helping businesses turn data into a strategic asset. As the founder of Boreas, Bradley has led successful projects spanning data integration, modeling, and advanced analytics, delivering exceptional data-driven solutions. He has worked with cross-functional teams across various industries, helping them understand and leverage complex technologies like large language models and machine learning, hot buzzwords that we're all hearing about, even in the mainstream media these days. Bradley's expertise lies in making data simple for teams to implement and act on, transforming complex data pipelines into accessible insights. And if you're thinking, what the heck does all that stuff mean? Well, that's why Bradley's coming on today. I love the headline on his website. I'm going to tease that before we dive straight into my interview. As soon as we came across the Boreas website, where it says at the top, we help bring data to life. There's so much that we can unlock in our businesses with what we're going to learn today. So I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Bradley Boldenow. All right, Bradley, I am so very excited that you're here. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. Excited to be here.
Heck yes, so many technical things that you're going to introduce us to and walk us through here today. But before we get to those, take us beyond the bio. Who's Bradley? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, I started out in marketing and public relations. I never knew that I had a passion for data until I got into the professional world, started out in marketing and public relations. Through that role, was kind of introduced into how data can be used to really drive a business and help people within a business learn and understand what's working. And from there, I kind of slowly made the transition fully into the data world. And now, having spent the last 7 years being, essentially a data nerd, I've loved every second of it, and excited to see where we can go from here.
Yeah, Bradley, I'll tell you what, as you heard me tease in the intro to today's episode, there are so many different corners of the data world when we talk about business and data analytics and all of the ways that we could take our conversation today. Obviously, AI is a big cornerstone when we start introducing terms like large language models and machine learning. All of that is powered and driven by data. Where's your intersection of this world of data? Are we talking sales data? Are we talking AI and machine learning? Where do you really enjoy getting into the nitty-gritty of how data powers businesses?
Yeah, I think my favorite part of the process is really kind of being the intermediary between the data and the business. I love just businesses in general, being able to take a product or service and use that to help make people's lives better. And on the flip side, I am very much into the data. I love being able to take raw data and transform it into insights and information that can drive a business. So I love really that intersection of the business and the data, and being able to really assist businesses in using the data that they have to understand what's working, what's not working, and use that to drive their investments and ultimately see the most return on their business. I've seen so many different businesses take their raw data and use it to better themselves. And I just feel like there's just so much power in being able to use data effectively within a business. So I really love being kind of that intermediary between the business and the data that they have.
Yeah, Bradley, I want to push you a little bit for examples, but I want to interject here of one example that we're all very familiar with as consumers, which is, of course, it's the largest online retailer, Amazon. And we as consumers, we see it so frequently that, products similar to what you're looking at, or based on what you've bought in the past, here's something that we think you may be interested in. We chalk a lot of it up today. I feel like today we kind of confuse AI with data as we think that they're one and the same, but Amazon, Target, Best Buy, all of these big box retailers, they've been using data for more than a decade at this point to drive consumer behavior. What are some real life examples, both big business and small business, Bradley? Because I'd love for you to show our listeners what's possible on all sides of the spectrum so that this isn't reserved just for the enterprise level.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the product recommendations that we as consumers see on Amazon and really now almost any e-commerce website. That's really kind of been the gold child, this kind of that gold standard, I'd say, of machine learning that really kind of kickstarted businesses saying, okay, Amazon's doing this, how can we follow and use data to the best of our abilities? And, it's fun because there's so much you can do with data. And so, for instance, we're working with some smaller brands and retailers who are selling on Amazon. And oftentimes when companies think about data or people think about data, they jump straight into those more advanced applications like machine learning, AI, predictive analytics. But there's such a foundation, such a base that is so valuable and impactful to especially smaller and medium-sized businesses that we love to focus on. So, for instance, the seller that we're working with on Amazon, it's as simple as taking their sales data and visualizing that data so that the brand can understand, okay, are our sales trending up or are they trending down? And let's say they're trending down, giving them a dashboard, the resources for them to understand what's driving our sales up or down so that they can take actions to either lean into what's working or fix what's not working. So oftentimes, people like to jump into the very fancy applications of data like machine learning and AI, but there's so much low-hanging fruit that you can do in simply taking the data that your business has access to and visualizing it to just get a base understanding and having that context of how your business is trending, then be able to take actions to, like I said, capitalize on what's working and mitigate what's not working. But then, so once you have that foundation, once you're able to kind of put that data to use, that's when you start to ideate and find those more advanced applications of data. So, for instance, one recent project that we've been working on for a larger media agency that specializes in TV advertising is helping them take their media logs. So every single week they get a log of all of the ads that they're going to be running on their client's behalf. And what they'd like to do is, before actually placing those media logs and buying those TV spots, they want to understand, okay, what can we expect to see in return for each of these TV spots that run? And we're able to essentially build a predictive model that takes those TV spots and then tell them in terms of the number of people that are coming to the website, whether it's e-commerce sales, we can predict using that data what their expected outcome would be. And then they can align that with the goals and objectives of each client to determine, okay, are the expected results below or above where we want to be with these clients, and then make adjustments back in that media log to ensure that they're doing whatever they can to meet the goals of their clients. So it is fun because there's just so much that can be done with data, from obviously the very fun and shiny applications like AI and machine learning, but really just the most base levels of putting data to use can provide so much return for businesses. So it's fun having such a variety of different applications that we can work through with our different clients.
Yeah, for sure. I can see that. It must be fun because you're talking about so many different outcomes from the data. You're talking about making decisions based on data. You're talking about predictive analytics based on data. And obviously all of these things are relying on inputs, and you're generating the correct amount of outputs and the correct outputs that you're even gearing towards so that you have some actionable outcomes. Bradley, let's enter AI into the conversation at this point because it's something that is on the tip of everybody's tongue these days. From my perspective, perspective, it's made those outcomes even easier, of course, based on the inputs. And I want to hear your perspective on both inputs and outputs and the correct way to do both of those. But I'll throw a real life example into this, is that for the podcast, we realize, we have almost 1,000 episodes at this point. All of those episodes have transcripts and show notes and guest bios and all of that. We feed that into various AI tools and we say, hey, let us know if you identify any synergies and connections that we should make between our guests for business networking. And it's cool that it's drawing these lines and these parallels that we, with so many different variables at play, we don't even see some of these things from our vantage point. So it's really helpful to have AI as that conduit to deliver the outcomes that we're looking for. Talk to us about how all this plays together. And especially, I'd love to hear your emphasis on those inputs and outputs and how it really drives the quality of all the things data.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad you bring up inputs and outputs when it comes to AI and large language models, tools like ChatGPT and Gemini, because I think often we focus too much on the output of what can we get out of these large language models. But what we oftentimes lose sight of is that what we get out of the models is usually dependent on what we put into it. And the more information we can provide a large language model, the better the information that we can provide a large language model, the more effective the outputs are going to be. And so that's always where we want to start with a client that says, hey, we know we should be using large language models. What are some ideas, some ways in which we could potentially use these, and what are the outputs we can get? Oftentimes we say, okay, let's pause for a second and let's think about what data that we have and how can we use that data to either automate process, to provide internal teams with better information, to provide customers with better information. We always want to start by looking at, okay, what data and information do we have and how can we put that to use? Because oftentimes clients will have these grand visions of how they could potentially be using large language models and say, hey, we could potentially use a large language model to catalog all of the comments and reviews on our products and then get better ideas of how we can adjust maybe the copy for our products on our e-commerce catalog. But what they realize then is that, we don't have that standardized, structured set of data that contains all of our product reviews, all of our product comments. And so at that point there, well, what can we do? We can't really do anything without the data that we need to be able to get the outputs that we desire. And so that's kind of where I feel like there's not enough attention being put on what data do we need in order to use a large language model to the best of its ability? And then on top of that, then how can we build out the infrastructure so that we can have a more automated process? So it's not just team members having to constantly go to ChatGPT, enter in information, and then do it with a will, but rather have process in place that can help automate and streamline the usage of these large language models so that it's fully baked into how they are going about their business.
Yeah, Bradley, I'll tell you what, it's immediately apparent to me how intentional you are about when we're talking about AI. You emphasize the fact that they are large language models. That's what is actually driving these tools that we just lump in as AI. You mentioned a few of them. ChatGPT and Gemini are two of the huge ones. I've personally switched to Claude. I love Claude for so many different reasons, but obviously they're a dime a dozen. But what makes them all common is that they are large language models. So Bradley, you're the first ever in this show's history to talk about the technicalities of this. What the heck is a large language model? Why do we hear that term so much? And why is it important in understanding how these tools even work?
Yeah, large language models, they're amazing. So what they are, so think of a ChatGPT, and essentially what a large language model is doing under the hood is it's essentially a mathematical model that is looking at an insane amount of data. So it's going online and reading almost any website on the internet. It's reading every single post that's on Wikipedia, and it's under the hood, it's training itself to be able to predict what word would come next given a previous series of words. So if the start of the sentence is the dog, the large language model is essentially going to predict, okay, which word is most likely going to come after the words the dog. And then it's going to essentially then use that to provide an output in which it sees as sufficient based on the prompt that a user gives it. So it's kind of interesting to think that, today you can ask it, provide me a recipe. I have these 5 ingredients and I want to be able to cook it in 20 minutes. And it's going to actually be able to provide you with that information down to the specific list of ingredients that you provide it. And all it's really doing is just predicting which word comes after the other. So the technology is pretty amazing, especially for the value that we are all being able to get from this tool. It's just fascinating. And now that some of the hype, at least, is starting to die down with large language models and generative AI. So it's really it's interesting to see now how these tools are being used at a more base level for both companies as well as individuals. It's just really, and it's crazy to think this is just the beginning of kind of, whether you want to call it an AI revolution or whatever, but the adoption of this technology, we're still so early on in its phase that it's just so exciting to be able to even think about what's going to come next.
Yeah, piggybacking off of that, I'm definitely going to throw some shade right now at both mainstream media and all of the entrepreneurs out there who are using all of this as an excuse, saying that, well, AI is just going to replace every single job. Generative AI art is already going to replace graphic designers, and ChatGPT has already replaced content creators and copywriters and all of these things. Bradley, you seem very comfortable in the corner of the world that you're in. And obviously, having seen your website, I think it's so cool the way that you structure your services, and we're going to talk about what all of those look like to bring that data to life. But what's your take on it when people say, oh, AI is just going to replace people?
No, yeah, and I've used both the API to be able to leverage large language models in more automated ways for businesses. I use ChatGPT myself every single day to help just whatever task I'm working on. And, I feel that in probably 90% of the time, a large language model will get you 80% of the way completed with a task. And the last 20% of completing that task that the human's responsible for is by far the most important piece of that task. So for instance, let's say I want to write an email to a client, and I say, hey, ChatGPT, can you write me an email to this prospective client telling them about our services? ChatGPT will provide me with an email that's 80% of the way there before I'm ready to send. But that last 20% of me going in, adding on more of a human touch, adding in some more personal notes to that email will be what makes that email that I'm sending ultimately successful. If I were to just take what that ChatGPT or the large language model provided me and just send it out, people are going to look at that and be like, a robot wrote this. This is not personal at all. I don't want to have to deal with this email. I'm just going to throw it in my trash. So I think large language models won't replace jobs. They'll enhance jobs by making it easier for people to complete tasks. It'll save them time and allow them to focus on more strategic things, like how can I make this email as resonating as possible for this client. So I don't personally have a few, and there always be some major changes with a technology like this, but again, I think overall the net benefits will be extremely positive because it will allow people to do a lot more with a lot less.
Yeah, I really appreciate hearing your perspective on that. Actually, to me, what I'm hearing is it's just making your superpowers even stronger. You can do so much more than what one human typically could do. So even just looking at the depth and breadth of your services, I'd love for you to talk about this stuff because a lot of listeners probably have always heard about the world of data and analytics within business, but they've always wondered, what does it look like to have someone on my team who's actively helping me with that? And Bradley, I love the fact that you focus on everything from, hey, let's make sense of the data. Let's put it into the right visualization. Let's harmonize the data so it actually makes sense to us. Let's develop things. But even as simple as the way beginning end of this entire process of integrations, making sure that data is feeding from places where we want it, where it comes from, to where we want it to be. Bradley, walk us down that road path. What does this look like to work with someone who is so adept with data and making sense of it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And yeah, you kind of alluded to it earlier in the introduction. We really focus and we really want to be the best at making data as easy to use for people who are not necessarily data people or even technological people themselves. And so the process that we really like to work through is starting with a question. Everyone within a business has a question that they need to answer to be able to go about their business. So for instance, we typically work in the marketing space, so we work with a lot of marketers who have questions as simple as, is our marketing working? And we work with that business partner, that marketer, to start with that question, and then we work backwards, essentially then enabling them to, like you said, obtain the data. So then, for this marketing case, we'd go to the different channels in which they're marketing, in which they're communicating about their product or services. We can ingest that data into a data storage tool like Snowflake or Power BI, and essentially model that data and get it into a state in which it resembles how the business operates. So we're able to store that data and get it into a point in which they have the attributes, they have the metrics that match up with, okay, this is our question, this is how our business operates. Then ultimately, then we can take that data, and whether it's visualizing it in a dashboard, building a model, building a tool, leveraging that data that allows then that marketer to use it to answer their questions and go about their business with more context, more information to make better decisions, is kind of the general process which we follow to ensure that businesses that have questions are able to use data to answer them and continuously improve.
Yeah. Hearing you talk about this, Bradley, though, I would imagine that you see data where others don't. And even just using this example that you've introduced us to of the marketing study, the marketing question, let's roll with that for a little bit. A lot of people will probably think, okay, here's my sales data. Here's what it is. Make sense of it. I would imagine that you go beyond what we all traditionally view as data in our business, because there's so many different ways that data shows up through reviews. You talked about earlier in our conversation today, through website traffic. There's so many different places for us to gather data that I would argue most of us business owners, especially those of us who aren't technical or data focused, we probably don't even realize the data that we have. So give us some examples of those sources of data that you look at that others may miss.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So obviously there's, the known data within a business. So things like point of sale data for an e-commerce or brick and mortar business. For marketers, it's, they run campaigns on Facebook, Google, Trade Desk, TV. So they have all of their campaign data from all of those different source systems. But then there are a lot of these ancillary data sources, data sets that are impacting how their customers operate, how their customers think and feel. So, oftentimes you can include even things like weather data that may not be directly impacting the operations within a business, but maybe impacting how a customer thinks and feels about a product, and may impact their path to purchase, things like that. So it's really fun to have conversations with business to understand who their customers are, how they sell their product, what matters to their business, and then being able to think creatively and work with them to identify some of those potential hidden areas that in which they weren't thinking of, but then we can go out and find that data to be able to provide them with the insights that, again, they may have not thought of initially when they thought about how their business operates, but in a way, and in roundabout ways, maybe impacting their business. And then by collecting that data, giving them those insights, just allows them to have that context they didn't have before to really drive better decisions and better outcomes.
Yeah, it's so cool hearing about all of this stuff, because also I've had the pleasure of looking over just some of your clients that you showcase on your website, and it's everything as diverse as a joint relief practice to a vegan jerky company to co-working spaces to service-based businesses, all of these different types of businesses, Bradley. And you've picked on e-commerce a little bit today because that is an industry that is very driven by metrics and analytics. Give us some examples of some of these more different industries that a lot of people might convince themselves of, oh, I build websites, or I'm a social media agency. What am I going to do with data and analytics? Give us some examples as to how it plays into decision making and growth that can happen there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, we're actually working with a company called Golf Forever right now, which is a very interesting client. They provide both products as well as an application on mobile devices that golfers can use to essentially build a workout plan that's catered around the muscles that's needed to maintain their golf game long into their life. And you wouldn't think, especially when it comes to golf, you wouldn't think of data probably much at all. But it's so interesting to see how this current company is using data as people log into the application, as they complete workouts, as they submit assessments as to what they want to work on and the areas of the golf game that they want to improve on, how data can be used to essentially improve a golfer's game. So being able to understand, okay, this golfer fits this profile, they're this, they are maybe 50 years old, they golf 3 to 4 times a week, and they have lower back pain. And being able to use data to then surface up recommendations for this user to say, hey, I think these are the workouts that you should focus on in order to improve your golf game, while fixing or trying to help aid your lower back pain, and then focusing on these different areas of your swing that you feel are lacking. It's just so interesting to see how data can be used really in so many different applications, especially as a golfer myself. I never really thought of much data behind my golf game, but now being introduced into this client and seeing how they're using data and how we're helping them use data and enhancing their customer experiences, it's been a really, really amazing kind of fun project to work on.
Yeah, Bradley, I've always kind of argued that the sister sport of golf is my favorite sport to play, which is tennis. And it's really cool because in tennis, we've got a similar app. It's called Swing Vision, where I just throw my cell phone up on a fence. Every single tennis court is surrounded by a fence. And after the match, I've got data on my forehand, my backhand, how much spin I've been generating, what my error rate is, my serve percentages. And it's really cool because you're right. That's actionable data to me to get better, which is obviously the pursuit of everything that we're doing in our businesses and in our lives, which leads me to ask you this question, Bradley, because knowing that we're being listened to by business owners all over the world at all different sizes and all different industries, they're probably thinking, Bradley, this sounds great. However, I have to also worry about getting sales and doing marketing and doing accounting and managing my staff. And there's so many other things. How do you embed this stuff, a data-driven focus and decision-making process? How do you embed it into your clients? Is it in a dashboard? Is it weekly or monthly meetings with you? How do they actually get aboard the train of having data move their business forward in a really tangible way?
Yeah, it's a great question. And honestly, it varies from client to client depending on how they operate, depending on where they are with their data literacy. But what we always encourage is starting small. So instead of thinking about, okay, how can our business as a whole become more data-driven, start with a much more refined scope of a project that could benefit from having more data drive the progression and the process behind that more specific area of your business. That is extremely valuable in that you don't bite off more than you can chew, and that then the results of a data project then don't just fall off towards the end. By starting small, you're able to become more targeted in your approach. It also makes the project more manageable in itself, in that you're not going out and getting all of the data, you're just getting a very defined set of data and then putting that data to use with a smaller set of stakeholders. That allows you to get more regular feedback. It allows you to adjust and iterate how that data is being put to use. Like you said, whether it's a dashboard or maybe your team would rather prefer having a weekly report generated and shared. All of that will most likely be uncovered as you're going. It most likely won't be known before you get that project started. So by starting small and having a more defined scope of how we're going to put data to use for this specific area of our business or the specific project, it just allows for, again, that better feedback and learning as you go. And then by the time the project is completed, those valuable insights can then be used to start again and continue to just add data into more areas of the business in a much more manageable and iterative way.
Yeah, I really like that grounded approach. Bradley, I think that you're the epitome in so many ways of one of my favorite quotes of all time. It's from Albert Einstein, where he says, if you want to impress someone, make it complicated. If you want to help someone, make it simple. And I love the fact that even when we talk about the implementation of it, you say, hey, let's just focus on one area. We're not trying to make your entire business a data powerhouse. Let's just focus on one aspect. Or even earlier in the conversation, you alluded to just one question. Let's ask one question and start to solve that with data. So I really appreciate those insights. I also love in these conversations to bring it not just about your subject matter expertise, but also entrepreneur to entrepreneur. That you are one of us, Bradley. You are not only incredible at what you do with data, but you are a fellow business owner. So with that in mind, knowing that you had a career in data leading up to you going forth and serving clients under your own business brand, what's that transition been like? Is it everything that you hoped and dreamed for? Are there aspects of the entrepreneurial journey that have surprised you? I'd love to hear some insights there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's I kind of got to pinch myself and think about how I'm being a full-time entrepreneur right now. And it's been, maybe at least to me, it kind of seems like a unique journey to get to the point where I'm at today, where it actually started about 3 years ago as I was working full-time as a data solutions engineer. It was during COVID. I had a lot of time on my hands. I liked what I was doing. So I said, hey, why don't I see if anyone else needs help with a project here and there? So I essentially started freelancing as I was working at a 9-to-5, doing essentially what I was doing for my 9-to-5, but just for other clients. and did that on a part-time basis. And over the course of a couple years, that side hustle slowly grew. I added on a couple more team members, and it got to the point where we said, well, essentially, we have enough business to do this full time. We love doing it, so why not just jump in, off the deep end and do it, as a full-time entrepreneur. So it's been it's rather slow progression to get to this point, but that has been just fun to be able to see the business expand. We started out in just one very specific data-related platform, and then slowly over time, we started to grow and expand the different projects that we were working on, the areas of different businesses we were working on. So it's just been a really fun transition and journey to see how this business has grown and just gather these different experiences and clients that we've had to this point.
Yeah, I love that. And it's that sort of organic and intentional step-by-step growth that I think is on display not only in your entrepreneurial journey, but in the way that you address business problems and solutions. So huge kudos to you with the consistency in your approach. I really admire that about the way that you operate in all the ways. Even you and I just exchanging over emails, how understanding you were in flexibility and us getting this scheduled. It's something that is so apparent to me in the way that you work. So it's something that's really cool to see from the outside looking in, Bradley. And I always love to ask this question at the end of episodes because I never know which direction guests will take it in, and that is your one best piece of advice or takeaway for listeners. Knowing that listeners are at all different stages of their business journeys, and some of them are still stuck on the sidelines as entrepreneurs. Bradley, what's that one thing that you want to impart on them at the end of today's episode?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is going back to that questions. I think when it comes to data, people get writer's block in terms of, okay, how are we going to use data? And I would say, don't even think about data, just think about the questions that you have as a business. And think about the questions that if I had an answer to this question, I would be better off. And that's really the heart and the soul of any data-related project is that question. So I would really recommend, again, focusing on the questions that if you had the answer to, your business and you as a person would be better off. And then from there, work backwards to then the rest from there. Once you get to that point, the rest of the data pieces of the project will fall in place. As long as you have that question and the answer that you need, you'll be well off in terms of using data to the best of its ability.
Yes, really well said. And once again, so consistent with your approach in all the things, which is why I'm really excited. I've teased your website a few times throughout today's episode, but your headline at the top of the website, we help bring data to life. You've certainly delivered on that. And right underneath that, you detail your approach. And there's a diagram of, hey, at the center of it is your objectives. Let's create a flow that gets us to where it is that you want to be. So Bradley, you've been a wealth of knowledge. I'm super excited for listeners to go deeper into your website and all the great things that you're putting into the world. So drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
Yeah, feel free to reach out. I'm on LinkedIn, happy to chat. I love talking about this stuff. So happy to chat on LinkedIn, Bradley Boldenow, or Boreas, www.theboreas.com is where you can get that information on kind of how we operate, how we like to focus our work. But ultimately love to have conversations with people about how they want to use data, their business, and how we can grow and partner together.
Yes, listeners, and if you thought that this was going to be an intimidating and technical episode, you see how much Bradley not only really loves this stuff, I think that that's so evident here today, but also the fact that he makes it so actionable for us, so understandable for all of us, whether you're technical or you're not technical at all. It's just so cool that he's focused on the business, the problem, the question at hand, and that's the way that we want to approach all the things, whether we're talking data or marketing or sales. We don't want to talk about it from the technical components. So reach out to Bradley. He just dropped 2 of those locations. His LinkedIn, his website is at theboreas.com, but you already know the drill. We're putting both of those links down below in the show notes, wherever it is that you're tuning in to today's episode. So feel free to reach out to him. He's super easy to get a hold of. You'll see a contact form right on the bottom of his website, or just personally on LinkedIn. You'll find those links down below. So Bradley, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Brian.